Welcome to Golden Mountain, Golden Meadow. Once again, I'm coming here for reading the third lesson. I think, reading is my life. Reading is an exciting. Golden Mountain, Golden Meadow. Reading gives us pleasure. Reading actually gives a lot of knowledge, enlighten us. So I think I must go on. Whatever the condition is, I'm gonna continue reading. I would request all the viewers, despite having buffering, please hang on and read along. So, the first question before we read the lesson of Devoted Son by Anita Desai: will you be ready to sacrifice your career status and economic opportunities for the good of your parents? Why or why not? In your view, what are the qualities of devoted son or daughter? So, this particular lesson belongs to Grade 12 English book, the new course 2021, under the short stories. This is the third story on the literature section. Let's learn more about it. Let's go on it. Let's go for it. So, in your view, what are the qualities of a devoted son or daughter? If you have any thoughts in your mind, please feel free to comment on the comment section. Now I'm gonna go about the author. Anita Desai, original name Anita Majumdar, born in 1937, is an Indian novelist, short story writer, and the writer of children's books. As a biracial child born to a German mother and Indian father, Desai was exposed to Germany, Hindi, and English languages for her childhood. After completing her BA from University of Delhi, Desai began to publish her stories and novels. Her novels Cry the Peacock, published in 1963, Where Shall We Go This Summer, published in 1975, Fire on the Mountain, 1977, Clear Light of the Day, 1980, In Custody, 1984, Baumgartner's Bombay, 1988, Journey to Ithaca, 1995, Fisting, 1999, and Zigzag Way, 2004. Received mixed response from the readers. She received Sahitya Academy Award for her novel Fire on the Mountain. Her novel In Custody was adapted into film in 1993. She published several volumes of short stories, including Games at Twilight and Other Stories in 1978, Diamond Dust and Other Stories 2000, that means 2000. Two of her children's books, The Village and the Sea, 1982, and The Artist of Disappearance in 2011, became popular among Indian children. The Devoted Son is extracted from her collection of stories, The Complete Short Stories. A Devoted Son is a realistic story set in a middle-class Indian family in an Indian village. This story shows how parents cherish their ambition towards the children and how a son should fulfill his duty towards the parents. Let's go on to the story now. Let's begin. When the results appeared in the morning papers, Rakesh scanned them barefoot and in his pajamas at the garden gate, then went up the steps to the veranda where his father sat sipping his morning tea and bowed down to touch his feet. "A first division, son?" his father asked, beaming, reaching for the papers. "At the top of the list, Papa," Rakesh murmured, as if awed. "First in the country." Bedlam broke loose then. The family whooped and danced the whole day long. Visitors streamed into the small yellow house at the end of the road to congratulate the parents of this wunderkind, to slap Rakesh on the back and fill the house and garden with the sounds and colors of a festival. There were garlands and halwa, party clothes and gifts, enough fountain pens to last years, even a watch or two, nerves and temper and joy, all in a multicolored world of bright and great shining vistas nearly opened. Rakesh was the first son in the family to receive an education. So much had been sacrificed in order to send him to school and then medical college. And at last the fruits of the sacrifice had arrived, golden and glorious. To everyone who came to him to say, Mubarak, Barmaji, your son has brought you glory. The father said, Yes. And do you know what is the first thing he did when he saw the result this morning? He came and touched my feet. He bowed down and touched my feet. This moved many of the women in the crowd so much that they were seen to raise the ends of their saris and dab at their tears, while the men reached out for the betel leaves and sweetmeats that were offered around on trays and shook their heads in a wonder and approval of such exemplary filial behavior. One does not often see such behavior in sons anymore, they all agreed. A little enviously, perhaps. Leaving the house, some of the women said, sniffing, at least on such an occasion they might have served pure ghee sweets. Ghee sweets, ghee. And some of the men said, Don't you think old Burma was giving himself airs? He needn't think we don't remember that he comes from the vegetable market himself. His father used to sell vegetables, and he has never seen the inside of a school. But there was more envy than rancor in their voices, and it was, of course, inevitable. Not every son in that shabby little colony at the edge of the city was destined to shine as Rakesh's son. And who knew that better than the parents themselves? And that was only the beginning, the first step in a great sweeping ascent to the radiant heights of fame and fortune. The thesis he wrote for his MD brought Rakesh still greater glory. It only in select medical circles he won a scholarship. He went to the USA, that was what his father learned to call it, and taught the whole family to say, not America, which was what the ignorant neighbors called it, but with a grand familiarity, the USA, where he pursued his career in the most prestigious of all hospitals and won encomiums from his American colleagues, which were relayed to his admiring and glowing family. What was more, he came back. He actually returned to that small yellow house in the once new but increasingly shabby colony right at the end of the road, where the rubbish vans tipped out their stinking contents for pigs to nose in and rag pickers to build their shacks on, all steaming and smoking just outside the neat wire fences and well-tended gardens. To this Rakesh returned, and the first thing he did on entering the house was to slip out of the embraces of his sisters and brothers and bow down and touch his father's feet. Father's feet. Touch his father's feet. One of the Hindu religions, to greet elderly people. As for his mother, he gloated chiefly over the strange fact that he had not married in America and not brought home a foreign wife, as all adore neighbors had warned her he would. For wasn't that what all Indian boys went abroad for? Instead, he agreed almost without argument to marry a girl she had picked out for him in her own village, the daughter of a childhood friend, a plump and uneducated girl. It was true, but so old-fashioned, so placid, so complacent that she slipped into the household and settled in like a charm, seemingly too lazy and too good-natured to even try and make Rakesh leave home and set up independently, as any other girl might have done. What was more, she was pretty, really pretty, in a plump, pudding way that only gave way to fat, soft, spreading fat like warm wax after the birth of the first baby, a son, and then what did it matter? For some years, Rakesh worked in a city hospital, quickly rising to the top of the administrative organization and was made a director before he left to set up his own clinic. He took his parents in his car, a new sky blue ambassador with a rear window full of stickers and charms revolving on strings, to see the clinic when it was built, and the large signboard over the door on which his name was printed in the letters of red, with a row of degrees and qualifications to follow it like so many little black slaves of the resent. Thereafter his fame seemed to grow just like a little dimmer, or maybe it was only that everyone in town had grown accustomed to it at last. But it was also the beginning of the fortune, his fortune, for he now became known not only as the best but also the richest doctor in town. However, all this was not accomplished in the wink of his eyes. Naturally not. It was the achievements of a lifetime, and it took up Rakesh's whole life. At the time he set up his clinic, his father had grown into an old man and retired from his post at the kerosene dealer's depot, at which he had worked for 40 years, and his mother died soon after giving up the ghost with a sigh that sounded positively happy, for it was her own son who ministered to her in her last illness, and who sat pressing her feet at the last moment, such a son as few women had borne. For it had to be admitted, and the most unsuccessful and most rancorous of neighbors eventually did so that Rakesh was not only a devoted son and a miraculously good-natured man who contrived somehow to obey his parents and humor his wife, and so concerned equally for his children and his parents. But there was actually a brain inside his beautifully polished and formed body of good manners and kind nature, and in between ministering to his family and playing host to many friends and coaxing them all into feeling happy and grateful and content, he had actually trained his hands as well and emerged an excellent doctor, a really fine surgeon. How one man, and a man born to illiterate parents, his father having worked for a kerosene dealer and his mother having spent her life in a kitchen, had achieved, combined, and conducted such a medley of virtues no one could fathom. But all acknowledged his talent and skill. It was a strange fact, however, that talent and skill, if displayed for too long, ceased to dazzle. It came to pass that the most admiring of all eyes eventually faded and no longer blinked at his glory. Having retired from work and having lost his wife, the old father very quickly went to pieces, as they say. He developed so many complaints and fell ill so frequently and with such mysterious diseases that even his son could no longer make out when it was something of significance and when it was merely a peevish whim. He sat huddled on his string bed most of the day and developed an exasperating habit of stretching out suddenly and lying absolutely still, allowing the whole family to fly around him in a flap, wailing and weeping, and then suddenly sitting up stiff and gaunt, and spitting out a big gob of betel juice as if to mock their behavior. He did once too often. There had been a big party in the house, a birthday party for the youngest son, and the celebrations had to be suddenly covered and hustled out of the way when the daughter-in-law discovered, or thought she discovered, that the old man, stretched out from end to end of his string bed, had lost his pulse. The party broke up, dissolved, then turned into a band of mourners. When the old man sat up and distrust daughter-in-law received a job of red spittle right on the hem of her organza sari. After that, no one much cared if he sat up cross-legged on his bed, hawking and spitting, or lay down flat and turned grey as a corpse, except course, for that pearl amongst pearls, his son Rakesh. It was Rakesh who brought him his morning tea, not in one of the china cups from which the rest of the family drank, but in the old man's favorite brass tumbler, and sat at the edge of his bed, comfortable and relaxed, with the string of his pajamas dangling out from under his fine law night shirt, and discussed, or rather read out the morning news to his father. It was no difference to him that his father made no response apart from speaking. It was Rakesh too who, on returning from the clinic in the evening, persuaded the old man to come out of his room as bare and desolate as a cell, and take the evening air out in the garden, beautifully arranging the pillows and bolsters on the divan in the corner of the open veranda. One summer night she saw to it that the servants carried out the old man's bed onto the lawn, and himself helped his father down the steps and onto the bed, soothing him and settling him down for a night under the stars. Night under the stars. All this was very gratifying for the old man. What was not so gratifying was that he even undertook to supervise his father's diet. One day, one day, when the father was really sick, having ordered his daughter-in-law to make him a dish of suji halwa and eaten it with a saucerful of cream, Rakesh marched into the room, not with his usual respectful step, but with a confident and rather contemptuous stride of the famous doctor, and declared, "No more halwa for you, Papa. No more halwa for you. We must be sensible at your age. If you must have something sweet, Veena will cook you a little kheer. That's light, just a little rice and milk, but nothing fried, nothing rich. We can't have this happening again." The old man, who had been lying stretched out on his bed, weak and feeble after a day's illness, gave a start at the very sound, the tone of these words. He opened his eyes, rather they fell open with shock, and stared at his son with disbelief that darkened quickly to reproach. A son who actually refused his father the food he craved. No, it was unheard of. It was incredible. But Rakesh had turned his back to him and was cleaning up the litter of bottles and packets on the medicine shelf, and did not notice while Veena slipped silently out of the room with the little smirk that only the old man saw and hated. Halwa was only the first item to be crossed off the old man's diet. One delicacy after the other went. Everything fried to begin with, then everything sweet, and eventually everything that old man enjoyed. The meals that arrived for him on the shining stainless steel tray twice a day were frugal, to say the least. Dry bread, boiled lentils, boiled vegetables, and if there were a bit of chicken or fish, that was boiled too. If he called for another helping in a cracked voice that quavered theatrically, Rakesh himself would come to the door, gaze at him sadly, and shake his head, saying, "Now, Papa, we must be careful. We can't risk another illness, you know." And although the daughter-in-law kept tactfully out of the way, the old man could just see a smiling, sliding merrily through the air. He tried to bribe his grandchildren into buying him sweets, and how he missed his wife now, that generous, indulgent, and illiterate cook, whispering, "Here's 50 paisa," as he stuffed the coins into tight hot fist. "Run down to the shop at the crossroads and buy me 30 paisa worth jalebis, and you can spend the remaining 20 paisa on yourself. Eh? Understand? Will you do that?" He got away with it once or twice, but then was found out. The conspirator was scolded by his father and smacked by his mother, and Rakesh came storming into the room, almost tearing his hair as he shouted through compressed lips, "Now, Papa, are you trying to turn my little son into a liar?" Quite apart from spoiling your own stomach, you are spoiling him as well. You are encouraging him to lie to his own parents. You should have heard the lies he told his mother when he saw him bringing back those jalebis wrapped up in filthy newspapers. I don't allow anyone in my house to buy sweets in the bazaar, Papa. Surely, you know that. Thus, cholera in the city, typhoid, gastroenteritis. I see these cases daily in the hospital. Now can I allow my own family to run such risks? The old man sighed. Ha! Lay down in the corpse position. But that worried no one any longer. There was only one pleasure left in the old man now. His son's early morning visits and readings from the newspaper could no longer be called that, and those were visits from elderly neighbors. These were not frequent, as his contemporaries who were mostly as decrepit and helpless as he, and few could walk the length of the road to visit him anymore. Old Bhatia, old Bhatia next door, however, who was still spry enough to refuse adamantly to bathe in the tiled bathroom indoors, and to insist on carrying out his brass mug and towel in all seasons, and usually at impossible hours, into the yard and bathe noisily under the garden tap, would look over the hedge to see if Burma were out on his veranda, and would call to him and talk while he wrapped his dhoti around him and dried the sparse hair on his head, shivering with enjoyable exaggeration. Of course, these conversations, bawled across the hedge by two rather deaf old men conscious of having their entire households overhearing them, were not very satisfactory. But Bhatia occasionally came out of his yard, walked down the bit of road, and came in at Borman's gate. Corpse collapse onto the stone plinth built under the temple tree. If Rakesh was at home, he would help his father down the steps into the garden and arrange him on his night bed under the tree, and leave the two old men to chew bitter leaves and discuss the ills of their individual bodies, which with combined passion. At least you have a doctor in the house to look after you, sighed Bhatia, having vividly described his martyrdom to piles. Look after me, cried Verma, his voice cracking like an ancient clay jar. He does not even give me enough to eat. What? Said Bhatia, the white hairs in his ears twitching. Doesn't give you enough to eat your own son? My son, if I ask him for one more piece of bread, he says, no, Papa, I weighed out the atta myself. I can't allow you to have more than 200 grams of cereal a day. He weighs the food he gives me. Bhatia, he has scales to weigh it on. That is what it has come to. Never, murmured Bhatia in disbelief. Is it possible, even in this evil age, for a son to refuse his father food? Let me tell you, Burma, whispered eagerly. Today the family was having fried fish. I could smell it. I called to my daughter-in-law to bring me a piece. She came to the door and said no. Said no? It was Bhatia's voice that cracked. A drongo shot out of the tree and sped away. No, no, she said no. Rakesh has ordered her to give me nothing fried, no butter. He says no oil. No butter, no oil. How does he expect his father to live? Old Verma nodded with melancholy triumph. That is how he treats me after I have brought him up, given him an education, made him a great doctor. Great doctor! This is the way great doctors treat the fathers, Bhatia, for the son's sterling personality and character now underwent a curious sea change. Outwardly all might be the same, but the interpretation had altered. He mastered efficiency. His masterly efficiency was nothing but cold heartlessness. His authority was only tyranny in disguise. There was cold comfort in complaining to neighbors, and on such a miserable diet, Burma found himself sleeping, weakening, and soon becoming a genuinely sick man. Powers and pills and mixtures were not only brought in when dealing with the crisis like an upset stomach, but became a regular part of his diet, became his diet. Complained Burma, supplanting the natural foods he craved. There were pills to regulate his bowel movements, pills to bring down his blood pressure, pills to deal with his arthritis, and eventually pills to keep his heart beating. In between, there were panicky rushes to the hospital, some humiliating experience with a stomach pump and enema, which left him frightened and helpless. He cried easily, shivering up on his bed, but if he complained of a pain or even a vague, grey fear in the night, Rakesh would simply open another bottle of pills and force him to take one. "I have my duty to you, Papa," he said when his father begged to be let off. "Let me be," Burma begged, turning his face away from the pills on the outstretched hand. "Let me die. It would be better. I do not want to live only to eat your medicines. Papa, be reasonable." "I leave that to you," the father cried with sudden spirit. "Leave me alone. Let me die now. I cannot live like this." Lying all day on his pillows, fed every few hours by his daughter-in-law's own hand, visited by every member of his family daily, and then he says he does not want to live like this. Rakesh was heard to say, laughing, to someone outside the door. "Deprived of food," screamed the old man on the bed. His wishes ignored, taunted by his daughter-in-law, laughed at by his grandchildren, and that is how I live. But he was only old and weak, and all anyone heard was an incoherent croak, some expressive grunts and cries of genuine pain. Only once, when old Bhatia had come to see him, and they sat together under the temple tree, they heard him cry,